prefacing, thank you for joining us today. So all right, I guess I'll start. Hello, everyone. My name is Pong, P-O-N-G, like ping pong. I use he, him pronouns, calling in from New York City, on Lenape, Hoking, Lenape land. UNAVSA secretary. Also do a lot of like various odd jobs and administrative stuff in UNAVSA, including advising the marketing committee and the community safety committee, and anyone who needs support here and there, anywhere. Charlie.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Charlie, he, him pronouns, and I'm calling in from Baltimore, Maryland, also known as Piscataway land, and part of the MOVSA region. And I'm part of the civic engagement and CPP campaign committees in UNAVSA, as well as, I guess, multiple roles in MOVSA during camp and conference and all of that. But super excited to join you today, Pong.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here with everyone. Yeah, so our CPP campaign team created this amazing toolkit and has been and will be working on some really cool projects as we like end our terms together. But very briefly, yeah, Charlie, do you want to share why we all made this together and worked on this together as a squad and stuff?
Yeah, for sure. I think having been like a VSA leader in the past and everything, it's just like so hard to like put in like time and energy toward like doing fundraisers and doing CPP stuff, especially when, you know, it's like final season coming up and some of us work full time and everything, and it's like, how do you have the time to put in like research about APSC and like come up with ideas and everything? So we wanted to create a toolkit where all of that is like already there for you. So for example, if you're trying to come up with like blurbs for your social media posts about APSC, or if you're doing like a summit or a GBM or a conference or something and you want to do like a spoken blurb about APSC, like this will be there for you already. So we really want to reduce the amount of burden that you all as students have to put in when it comes to participating in CPP and APSC and stuff. And in addition to that, we also wanted to highlight some really cool ideas that VSAs and UVSAs and IVSAs in the past have had in terms of doing that, because we recognize that while you all are doing school and work, part of the burden is also the creative part of things. It's like sometimes we just don't have the capacity to think of creative ways to do that. And I know it's approaching the end of the year, but we hope that this will be inspirational for you all. And even for those of you who want to learn more about APSC's work, especially when it comes to their work with the prison and deportation pipeline and ICE transfers and everything, we have additional resources in there as well for you all to take a look at. And if I'm missing anything, feel free to add in, Pong. Yeah, and also Pong just put in the link to the toolkit in the chat as well. It's pinned. It's in bit.ly/CPP-APSC-toolkit, and that's also in our bio as well.
Great, thanks, Charlie. I guess we can just move on to the next section of the toolkit. For those who may be unfamiliar with, so CPP stands for the Collective Philanthropy Project, and it's an initiative for Vietnamese students and community organizations to really come together and work towards raising money, raising awareness for like one charitable cause each year. And so in the past, you know, there's been a bunch of different beneficiaries, charities, organizations. I've had the pleasure of working with Catalyst Foundation for one summer, for example, really amazing folks and organizers. And so in our toolkit, we have more information on like what CPP is and the history of CPP, ways to donate and support those various organizations. And for this year, the beneficiary is Asian Prisoners Support Committee. So really briefly, Asian Prisoners Support Committee is an organization based in Oakland, California, in the United States. And their mission is to provide direct support to incarcerated Asian Pacific Islander people and to raise awareness about the growing number of people in this community who are being imprisoned, detained, deported, and in all other forms and ways, criminalized, incarcerated, removed from their communities, right? And so the funds that our different VSAs across the nation, across the continent, and for anyone who is like outside North America, um, this toolkit provides ways for us to support APSC and their work in decarceration and supporting the freedom of like all people who are targeted by things like ICE and prisons. So that was a lot. I'm gonna sift through the language section um, really briefly. Um, so as some of you may know, um, there's been a lot of ways that folks have referred to people who are like inside cages, who are behind bars, right? Like different euphemisms, different terms, and like all of those vary. Um, and so going into the toolkit, we have a section that's a guidance on languaging and messaging that we want to emphasize tonight. So I'm reading verbatim, and I'm reading verbatim because I wrote this. But language is one tool that we all use to understand our world. It informs what is important and what has meaning, right? So it's really important for us to move away from terms like inmate or convict or felon, right? To really like get to a point where we embrace like new understandings and get to a point where we can really like honor everyone's humanity. And if you've been following us with our like community safety direction, for example, our priority like is survivors, and it's like the people who have been like violent in our space, and it's the surrounding communities, right? We're not like isolating anyone in that sense, right? Like we have to touch upon all areas because none of us exist in a vacuum, and really work to honor everyone's humanity. And if you have any more questions on that, you can look at our abolitionist content along with the community safety related events and projects we have on our YouTube and on UNAVSA's Instagram feed. So instead of terms like prisoner, inmate, convict, criminal, felon, right? We would instead use the terms like incarcerated persons or person impacted by the criminal legal system or a person who has been detained at or a person who's been criminalized, right? And this is mainly because people aren't reducible to their past behaviors or maybe current actions that they've done or some of the choices that we make sometimes. Um, And again, this is deeply tied to community safety, but something that we taught before in our internal meetings for UNAVSA last year in 2020 and 2021 was that we all have the capacity to harm, and that's an analysis of the world, right? That's an analysis of what violence is, and because we have all the capacity to harm, it's really important that we all develop ways to react to that and respond to that, and to really ensure safety. And that gives us room, right? That gives us room to imagine because that means that we all have the capacity to change, right? Um, Other terms that we try to avoid are things like, ex-prisoner. So instead we were say formerly incarcerated persons. And instead of a word like deportee, we would say this person is facing deportation or person impacted deportation. Another thing that we want to emphasize is the word criminal justice system. That word, is really used a lot, especially when we talk about like anti-Asian violence or violence against Asian people, or what some of you may call anti-Asian hate crimes. And so instead of the word criminal justice system, we advise that members, VSA members, youth, student leaders use the term criminal legal system. And this is because, as you've seen if you just look at 2020 until now, you'll see that a lot of institutions that uphold like justice, right, actually uphold things like punishment and retribution, and that's what they specialize in. That's actually a lot of what the critique against Title IX for those in the U.S., if you're familiar with, is that it's a system based on punishment and isolation. And so laws change with time, right? If you've seen the recent news with Roe v. Wade and the Supreme Court doing whatever clown show that they're doing, and laws change with who has power, right? So who has power in a given space often determines the rules of a given space. So for example, in your VSA spaces, those who have power are the ones that determine what community safety is, right? And so that varies per organization. We can have another conversation about that. And so we expand that, right, from that microcosm into the bigger picture. Laws change with time, and laws change with who has power. And the court decisions that people make, right, they vary per judge's interpretation of laws, right? That's why a lot of times when there are defense campaigns, there is pressure put on like the judges, right? There is pressure put onto the elected officials who have that power to pardon, because those are the ones that hold the power.
Yeah, thanks for giving that overview, Pong. And I guess I just want to add on that, you know, some of these like terms that we're advising like not to use, like prisoner, inmate, and so on, like like for me personally, I've like used those in the past without knowing it. And I know sometimes like we might accidentally put that into a post we're making for VSA or UVSA or anything, and that's like not like like you have the opportunity to correct that, and it's not like the end of the world if you've like done that in the past. Pong, wanted to add on.
Yes, and this is going to sound contradictory, but just bear with me, everyone. There are going to be times when people who are impacted by these systems, they are going to use those words, right? Even an
Exactly.
organization like Asian Prisoner Support Committee is using that term. The way that like I personally see it, and this is applicable to like the word survivor victim, right? Or reclamations of like the F word, the C word, the B word, the N word by by various groups, right? It's a reclamation, right? It's a recognition of like what harm has happened to them, and those impacted groups reclaiming that power that was taken away, that loss of agency that was that agency that was taken away, and autonomy that was taken away from them. So if an organization or that works, for example, with incarcerated people says prisoner, right? It's not the end of the world. It is a way of reclamation. That's the way that I personally view it.
Yeah, 100%. Like, it's funny because like I'm in like the academic space, and like sometimes you'll see academics like correcting people who are like using their own terms for themselves, and it's like, yeah, that's just taking agency away from people, and it's yeah, it's terrible. But yeah, thanks for that overview. But another thing that we have in our toolkit as well is defining some terms that you might come across while you're doing CPP work, because sometimes you might see on like the APSC website, or if you're doing research on that for your CPP campaign, there might be like really big words that aren't always defined right away. So I don't want to read every single thing verbatim because I know you all have access to this, and don't want to minimize your abilities to read and everything. But there were some things that I definitely wanted to highlight because it comes up a lot when we talk about these topics. But one of them is school to prison to deportation pipeline. That's something that we've talked about in UNAVSA in the past with our civic engagement work. But in terms of actually defining what that is, that refers to how educational policies, so that's things like expelling students and having police in schools and underinvesting in schools. Some of that, what I would call structural violence, contributes to students, and especially impacting Southeast Asians and other students of color, to being pushed out of the school system and into the criminal legal system, and then deportation. And if you saw our prior Instagram live, we did one on ICE transfers, and that's just one example of how that prison to deportation part of it works. And if you did miss our ICE transfer IG Live, that is referring to a system where prisons and jails actually collaborate with ICE to transfer people to immigration detention centers upon release. Some other words that you might see come up, things like decarceration. means eliminating or reducing the number of people behind bars. And prison industrial complex refers to how government, public, and private companies have interests in using surveillance, policing, and imprisonment for profit and as solutions for economic, social, and political problems. And very relevant to the work that APSC does. You'll see if you look on their Instagram page, they'll have a lot of defense campaigns. And what that means specifically are when uh, groups of people or organizations come together to help support and free a community member. And usually that'll come accompanied by a toolkit where that really helps you to raise awareness and contains calls to action and fundraisers as well. You'll also see that letter writing is something that APSC will engage in once in a while, and that's a way to show solidarity with incarcerated people. And that was really prominent back in the holiday season when they did a campaign there. And that's a testament to how prisons break relationships. And when we write letters, that helps to dismantle that isolation that happens and really creates that connection, collaboration, and coalition building again. And finally, emails and phone zaps are when groups organize people to use email and phone, usually in a small period of time at the same time to pressure individuals or institutions to do something. And that might either come with a defense campaign or for advocating for a policy. And we saw that with one that they're or some policies that they're advocating for to break the prison and deportation pipeline. All right, and I'll pass it to Pong to talk about key values and takeaway messages that we put in the toolkit as well.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. I guess before that, like I've personally been in the space. It's gonna reach a decade soon, I think, right? I don't know, 2014, 15. It's quite a long time. And so a new cause is chosen each year, a new organization is chosen each year, and a lot of times, just going into certain things I don't know, I didn't know all the terms, but it was like through this CPP and other projects, you get to learn about human trafficking, about how there are folks across the world who don't have the resources they need to survive, and in this case, you learn about how the legal system actually causes immense harm. So like, when any of us are doing this work, it's really important to have and share key values that we mentioned in the toolkit. And anyone's reading this, if you disagree with these key values, that's okay. It's it, we should always be open to having dialogue, right? And I said it in the last IG Live, say things with your chest. Just say it with your chest, and then talk with your community members about this. But some key values and takeaway messages that we recommend having, like when you're doing this work, we actually shared an Instagram post about this weekend. Is that number one? Nobody is disposable. So what this means is that nobody is disposable. That folks, no one, people, communities, groups, no one deserves to be thrown away. No one deserves to be hurt. No one deserves to be abandoned. Everyone deserves abundance. Everyone deserves to have their needs and resources met. Nobody deserves to be caged, deported, or subject to any other forms of violence. This includes like police violence. This includes, being fined for the most ridiculous things. This includes being sent to prison. This includes being deported, right? Caged. And when we say things like that, it's not like a throwaway line. Like when folks do this work, like folks do decarcerating work, like they really mean it. We really mean it. We really mean it. Because we also believe and know that people are capable of transforming. One lesson that we taught UNAVSA staff before is that no one enters violence for the first time by having committed it. So what that really speaks to is in the ways that we are all socialized to be harmful and violent, right? So that really informs some of our decisions that we make, or the situations that we're thrown into. And for the unfortunate few, right, some people do cause harm, and some people are caught. And because they're caught, right, they're subject to forms of further violence, right? So being separated from your communities, right? Not being able to walk outside, not being able to see your family, your friends, to have choices over what you eat, to have choices where you sleep. And the last key value and takeaway message that we want to amplify is something that APSC co-director has shared in news articles and in podcasts before. Her name is Nguyen, and that's we're only free when everyone's free. So that being said, there have been a whole bunch of different events that VSAs across the continent have been engaging in that range from like education to fundraising, to incorporating it into like your large scale regular programming, like culture shows, for example, and other sorts of like holidays, and just, you know, let your imaginations run wild. So we're gonna spend some time just highlighting and amplifying the VSAs and the events. Yeah, Charlie?
Yeah, for sure. I'm noticing in the audience tonight, there's like some NorCal people here, some UVSA NorCal people. So if you're here, shout out to you because we highlighted some of the stuff that you all are doing with CPP. And the very first one is you all organized a 1 hour presentation with APSC to allow your constituency to meet the APSC team and learn more about the organization. And that was really cool because it's not too often that VSA members get to see the people behind the work and everything. And I will say that APSC is a little tight on capacity. So if other VSAs or UVSAs want to do something similar, we might recommend that if NorCal is open to it, them sharing, a recording if one exists and one is available for them to comfortably share. But APSC also has some other material on their own where that includes community voices, so that might be another idea to share as well. I know there have been some interviews in the past where APSC has talked about some of their decarceration work, so that could be another resource.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. I think a recording does exist on NorCal UVSA's Facebook because that's how I watched it a few months ago.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah,
Amazing.
yeah. It is amazing. Their organization goes through a history of. It goes more in depth than like what our toolkit offers. But our toolkit doesn't have to offer like an extensive history of everything. But yeah, treat this as a guide. Yeah, I mean, I personally had the pleasure of being at VIA One this year. You know, some of you in the chat were at two. And so the CPP awards there recognize like various like members and also like VSAs that really made like significant impact and contributions in bringing awareness, right, and talking about Asian Prisoner Support Committee. And so at that conference, UVSA Midwest staff, there was an award throughout the entire night. Like it felt like an award show. Like I was at the VMAs, or that show with or like just an award show. And UVSA Midwest and other organizations like MOFSA, right, have done things like CPP Carnations and Roses fundraisers. So raising funds like during the dinner gala or the dinner banquet to raise money for Asian Prisoner Support Committee.
Yeah, I think that's super cool because for those of you who don't know, CPP has had a long history with the UVSA Midwest region, and some of that's also in the toolkit as well if you're interested in reading. So really cool to see that circle back to how much work they're doing now. And speaking of MOFSA, Pong, so MOFSA is my region and very proud of the amazing work they're doing with CPP. They did a fundraiser relay where they had their schools go head to head to compete to see who could raise the most money and who could have the most creative ideas to fundraise. And within that, like we saw sort of like the classic fundraisers where UMBC and William and Mary, both of them did like Café Ciudad and Thai tea fundraisers to raise money. But some people or some schools went a step further. So University of North Carolina VSA, they actually did an art auction to raise money. So I thought that was super cool. And Georgetown VSA also went above and beyond with their bingo board, red envelope, and candygram fundraisers, which all of that was going toward APSC. So you can see that there's sort of like a mix of different ideas you can do in different levels of effort. So it's not like you have to go above and beyond every time to make a meaningful effort to support APSC.
Yeah, yeah. And when we're doing this work, it's not just like UNAVSA deciding and assigning this for everyone to do, right? I've been in the space, I've been in a lot of your shoes before, like just being a regular member or like a regional member, but not being in the org. Um, but walk the walk, talk the talk, right? So, UNAVSA Civic Engagement Committee, which Charlie has been a part of for the past 2, 3 years. Um, so the Vietnamese advocacy event, so Viet Advocacy Month, so VAM in 2020, and Viet Advocacy Week, VAW in 2021. There were Asian Prisoner Support Committee representatives that came and shared about their experiences and what does it mean to work towards reuniting people with their communities, so reuniting other Southeast Asian people with their families and loved ones. Um, so in the first year of the Viet advocacy events, there was the anti-deportation call with Asian Prisoner Support Committee, and then last year in oh wait, that was in 2021, but in the first year there was a call talking about how to stop the direct transfers that you were alluding to earlier, Charlie, and how to really fight against the deportation of Vietnamese community members in California.
Wow. It's so crazy. Like, it's so wild to think about how that involvement with APSC has gone back so far ago, like 2019. And I personally know that a few VSAs have actually been doing work with APSC before that too. Like, I know Hopkins, like, we were considering like fundraising for APSC, like um, before this CPP selection happened. So I think CPP was really a cool like combination of where VSA is like heading in terms of like our community and the amazing civic engagement work that we're all doing. But yeah, really great event ideas. And then if anyone who's watching has seen like really cool ideas from other VSAs, feel free to shout that out in the chat or um, yeah, or even let us know afterward as well. But we're gonna move on, and if you're interested in reading more about these, again, these are linked in the toolkit. But I guess now we'll move on to the next section, and I'll pass it on to you, Pong.
Yeah. Well, I guess super briefly, like what is like our own background and experience in doing this? Charlie, like what is your own background in like how did John Hopkins like VSA even consider it, prior to the to all this?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think just because our board happened to like have a lot of representation from California, so one of our board members was from the Bay Area, Oakland, actually, and I was from Garden Grove, where grassroots organizations have been doing anti-deportation work, specifically Viet Rise and organizations like that. So, really having been exposed to that, that was a really cool window um, to transferring all of that to our VSA work. And I think that also speaks to how a lot of organizations are reaching out to young folks. Viet Rise, like I mentioned, I think that was like my first exposure to some of this work because they have also done defense campaigns and they've done like political education actually and walking tours and everything. And that's how I had the pleasure of being exposed to some of this stuff and now carrying on to my work right now with CPP Campaign. But Pong, I know you've had a lot of background with this work as well, so I would love to hear about sort of like your story and why you're doing this work.
Okay, sure. I mean, I do, but like, even so, I started organizing in 2020 after the uprisings against policing and police brutality, right? But like even prior to that, there were organizations like Mekong NYC that actually taught me about uh, the school to deportation pipeline, and an organization in my own region, Penn VSA, so University of Pennsylvania. Their members, Claire Nguyen and Luke Kircher. Luke was on our staff. They taught a workshop, and they talked about this. They talked about doing work and resisting ICE, and highlighting how it's incredibly violent and separates people from their families. And this was before I became and started becoming an abolitionist. But even then, like that, those type of things like really resonated to me, and just seeing their passion and seeing organizers like them, like Mekong, like really lay it out, like, oh wait, it's really important to know this history. I mean, that's why for like with the NorCal event, when APSC spoke, like there was an in-depth history of like what has happened in the United States, what has happened in California, how are people being deprived of the resources they need. Meanwhile, the systems of punishment have been increasing exponentially, right? Schools are being underfunded, hospitals, education systems, safety, right? Things that provide true safety are being like constantly defunded. Meanwhile, something like prison has been increased. Something like military grade weaponry for an armed agents of the state force has increased exponentially. Speaking as me living in New York, where we have a supervillain cop mayor. Um, yeah, yeah, organizing to burn it all down. That's pretty much it. Build new things. Build new things out of things that already exist. If that makes sense.
Oh my gosh, I love that, and I love how like Pan VSA was like a part of that journey as well, and really cool to see how that, yeah, like it's our own VSA community doing amazing things. And I guess that sort of brings me to like my next question is like what the future of this work in the VSA space looks like. I guess like what are your thoughts on that, Pong? And based on like what you've seen and based on you've been in the VSA space for a while as well, so I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I want to uplift. I haven't read her books, but Arundahi Roy said the pandemic was a portal. But I see that entire year as a portal, as a glimpse into what is possible. Like, yeah, immense harm, hurt, violence, conflict has been happening since then, and even prior to that. But we've really seen the ways that communities have come together. Very meta. I'm glad and I'm grateful for you, and I'm like working with you. I'm grateful for working with like our e-board, with like all our staff, the various members I met throughout all the regions, right? Because like I've seen people's work up close, and even prior to the pandemic, I've seen people's and students' work up close. Like, this is the impact of this and this event. This is the impact of all these organic relationships, these anchi-m, these yadins being formed, right? Like there's something like really really beautiful about that, because like all those things like create and sustain safety, right? All of those things create strong bonds and trust. Yeah, I say this every time I'm on live or when I'm at a conference, but 2020, many survivors came out, right? And that was an opportunity, and multiple organizations, have been trying to meet this and continuing to meet this. Those were opportunities to really create and sustain safety, because one of the values that we shared in this was that nobody is disposable, you know, and again, that is not a throwaway line. That's not some fantastic, optimistic, idealistic BS. It is a real, like, living value. It is something that you have to take seriously. And if you take that seriously, what does that mean? It means that you do not throw people away, even when they have been incredibly harmful in the space. And judging by the fact, you know, I actually just saw someone in the VSA space that shared a picture with someone who's been harmful on their Instagram earlier today. And I was just like, ugh. But you know, but what does that mean, right? It means that this person still loves this person. They still see this person as a community. So that is an opportunity for us to really address, like, the people who have been violent in the space. And using that, right, using that analysis and analyzing that, using that as a model to respond, right, to the more bigger, harsher problems. Because in the last IG Live with Nicole and Cindy, someone asked us, you know, what do we do about the people that do content warning, murder? What do we do about the people who do rape, for example? Like, what do we do? Well, if we work on the relationships we have with the people who have been violent in our own community spaces, we can use that to address, like, those bigger things. I mean, I tell people all the time, I don't have a direct answer to murder, but I do have an answer for rapists and people who do, like, sexual abuse. Like, I have an answer for those things, because other organizers have been doing that work. Other organizers see that nobody's disposable, that everyone deserves to have freedom, right? So, you know, I just have immense faith in our students. I have immense faith in our leaders and our alumni, who are really doing, like, critical work to develop relationships, to create and sustain safety, right? And to really address, like, the ways that punishment has been, it's been creeping on all of us. Yeah. So Charlie, what about you?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that, Pong. And definitely a lot of that like resonated with me as well. I think, yeah, I also have like a lot of faith in our communities and everything, our VSA communities, because I think um, maybe sometimes like from like the top down perspective of like looking at VSAs from the UNAVSA perspective or from the regional UVSA perspective, it can seem like people aren't doing anything, but it's like really at the local VSA level, like people are doing amazing work, like Penn VSA, like you mentioned, and a lot of other schools. And it's easy to create this narrative of what VSAs are, like, oh, all VSAs are apolitical and everything, but that's not true. And yeah, like if you really talk to like VSA leaders and what they believe in, you know, you'll see that that is not like a single like narrative, and not everyone is like, oh, I don't want to be political or anything like that. And yeah, and I think a reflection of like the Vietnamese American community in general, because there's also the perception that, oh, all Vietnamese people like don't want to be political because of whatever history we have with like war and our migration stories. But that's also not the case either, especially if you actually do on the ground work. If you knock on doors and stuff, you'll hear that people have like such a wide variety of lived experiences and perspectives that a lot of times this gets whittled down into a single narrative, especially in 2020 and everything like that. So I think I have a lot of, yeah, it just makes me happy to think about all the VSAs that are doing this amazing work and what we have going on for us in the future, especially with civic engagement and everything.
Actually, I wasn't gonna say this, but like adding on, like, the work that we've been doing in like community safety, right, and having, and really naming that, okay, what do we do about the violent people, right? When I was campaigning for UNAVSA secretary, like, there were at least two other regional organizations who were asking the question, what do we do about harmful people in our space? And it wasn't just reduced to, just removing them, which is not a bad thing. Removing people from a space is not a bad thing. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, they're considering, what do we do about them? Because these people aren't strangers, right? These are our loved ones sometimes, and sometimes they're us. And that's a very harsh reality. But that's an analysis of what violence is, right? And so, as we're like trying to develop ways to respond and ways to really figure out what do we do about the insert harm here, the people that do the immense forms of violence here, I know I personally, I'm not going to name them, but I can look to two organizations who were considering that, and one organization who included that into their private policies. They know who they are. And I'm thankful for their support of of me before in the past. But they know who they are, and that's like the local, right? That's the regional. That's not us UNAVSA. That's a regional organization that's figuring out, okay, maybe there is a way to let this person back into this space. How do we address what they've done in a way that to make sure they're never doing it again? So yeah, we community safety, myself, we cannot take credit for being the first ones in the VSA space who have done that. Interestingly enough, even though I've been vocal about it.
Yeah, but also a big shout out to you all, like the community safety committee, for the fact that you all exist even is like a pretty big step in like VSA culture and everything. And I know a few of you are also here in the audience as well, so a huge shout out to the great work that you all are doing. But yeah, I know we're sort of wrapping up on time, but I guess we wanted to end with some advice for VSA leaders and VSA members who are looking to support APSC, beyond what we've talked about in the toolkit. So I don't know if you want to start off, Pong, if you have any tips for people who are looking to do stuff.
Yeah, firstly, no one is forcing anyone to do this. FYI, because that is what we are resisting, right? Because prisons force you to do things, because the criminal legal system forces you to do things. So if anyone in any space, anywhere in the VSA space thinks that UNAVSA or any organization is forcing you all to do this work, untrue. Reject that. Challenge that. Speak up. Say something. Stand up. So I just want to be very clear about that. But yeah, do not be afraid to try out new things. Our organization is here if you need support in like having those tough conversations with people. Because let's really talk about like what we're doing, right? The work that they're doing to free people. Some of them may have done harm before, right? Some of them may have killed people. Some of them may have done like stolen, whatever, right? And so I don't imagine those conversations to be easy all the time. I know my own personal work and like educating folks on like abolition is not easy. But we are here. We're learning alongside you. I want to emphasize that too. Like, we're not above you. We are learning alongside you, and we are experimenting and trying new things out alongside you. And interestingly enough, the VSA organizations that we listed in the toolkit, right, who have been doing the events, they did it before UNAVSA, right? So
Yeah.
it's like y'all doing the work. It is y'all that is doing the work. So yeah.
Yeah. For real, yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but yeah, I'm glad you said that though, because there's this really amazing line that I think you wrote in the toolkit. It's like ultimately you and your organization should engage in things that you consent to. Like no one's like forcing you, or you shouldn't be forced to do this, especially now that we're entering final season and everything. I also want to add in the point about like personal capacity. I'm actually on like a hiatus for UNAVSA right now because I'm out of like for like health reasons and everything. So please keep your own personal capacity and well-being in mind as you're doing this work, especially like Pong said, like these are sort of difficult topics that we engage in for this. So that might mean a lot of emotional burden if you're getting pushback from community and everything. So take care of yourselves. At the same time, I think another point I want to bring up was I know we often bring this up in civic engagement at UNAVSA, but there are some misconceptions about what counts as political or what counts as like lobbying and stuff when it comes to tax exempt organizations. So that information is in the toolkit, so be sure to take a look at that. And we have some info for the US 501c3s as well as Canada not-for-profit organizations as well.
I think I got one more piece of advice. Okay, so it's in the toolkit, but if something doesn't work, right, consider spreading awareness and raising money with your members outside of the organization officially, right? don't forget that your UVSA most likely, and also UNAVSA is part of this campaign process too, right? We are all raising awareness about this. And if there's like a roadblock, if there's an obstacle, if something seems like impossible, yeah, you can worry, and also know that there are ways around things, right? Prior to like my team, right, for Northeast, there wasn't a Northeast organization, right? Well, alive at the time, and so like we revived it, we restarted it, right? So we saw that roadblock. It seemed impossible, but we did it, and now and there was just, I think, the third or fourth election just this past week. So like don't be afraid to try out new things. Don't be afraid to experiment, and just to remember, like we are here. We are a community. I really mean that. I'm not romanticizing that. I really, literally mean it.
Yeah. I think that's such a wonderful note to end on. We're all community and we're all here for you. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to contact our organization as well. Um, maybe I can't like volunteer other people since I'm technically on a break, but cpp.campaign@unafsa.org is the CPP campaign email if you have questions about the toolkit. And we have some other email addresses that you can reach out to in the toolkit as well, depending on what questions or concerns you have.